Hello and welcome. I am Christopher Jon Bjerknes. It is September 30th, 2022. I'm the author of numerous books on Christianity and Kabbalah. You can find my books at my website, cjbbooks.com. There will be a link to my website in the description below, as well as a link to my PayPal donation page where you can make a contribution. Today, I'm going to explain to you how the Kabbalists and medieval Christians describe the creation of Jesus Christ in the womb of the Virgin Mary. There were three different belief systems which are all interrelated and which influenced one another in the Middle Ages. And those three relate to the succubus Lilith, who is the female aspect of Satan, and who in the oral tradition of Judaism is thought to have impregnated Eve with Cain and the Virgin Mary with Jesus. She appears as a serpent, and she places fetuses of demons into human women so that those women then rear those baby demons as their own children to build the army that Lilith utilizes of demons. Another of the biblical stories related to the creation of Jesus is the creation story of Adam, where clay was molded into the shape of a human being, and then breath was placed into that clay to animate it. And the Kabbalists explain that the form that took was a magical word was spoken by the gods, which animated the clay and gave it life and created humanity. So there were two different strains of humanity. There was the strain of Adam, which became the Israelites, and there was the strain of Cain, who was the spawn of the serpent Lilith, and Eve, who was separated from the androgyne Adam. So Cain had a dual nature. He had the nature of Satan, and he had the nature of Eve. The soul of Cain was reincarnated into Jesus, who was also created by the succubus Lilith, who placed a fetus into the Virgin Mary. Cain was the firstborn child of Eve, and in a sense it was a type of virgin birth because she was impregnated by one of the gods, by Satan, in the form of the succubus Lilith. So that explains the Kabbalistic tradition of how the Virgin Mary was able to become pregnant with Jesus and nurture that fetus and give birth to it. There's also another Jewish tradition which is related to all of this, and that is the lore of the Golem, which appeared at least as early as the Talmud in the tractate Sanhedrin, folio 65b, where it discusses how the rabbis can animate matter to create life. The rabbis consider themselves to be gods, so all they were doing was mimicking Yahweh's creation of Adam to create the Golem. A major aspect of the legend of the Golem is that the Golem becomes a monster who becomes a smiting stone who destroys the non-Israelites, the Gentiles, the nations. Jesus Christ was just such a golem. He was created to destroy the Romans, the Europeans, and the non-Israelites in general. And I'm going to prove that the many legends of the golem throughout the centuries cryptically identify it with Jesus Christ, and especially with the second coming of Jesus Christ, when the gates of wisdom and the fountains of wisdom were supposed to be opened in the year 1840, which on the Hebrew calendar is the year 5600. And that is when the legend of the Golem really took off. And books were written about Rabbi Lerv of Prague, who was a rabbi in the 16th century, claiming that this rabbi created a golem to smite the emperor who had issued a proclamation condemning the Jews. And that's exactly what happened with Jesus. He was a golem raised from the clay of chaos to smite the Gentile world. Another one of the traditions that was established to explain the mystery of the virgin birth of Jesus Christ was the idea that Jesus was created as a homunculus, a tiny little man who was made by alchemists in the form of putrefied male seed that was placed into a glass flask. The menstrual blood, which was thought to nourish the fetus, was replaced by drugs, minerals, chemicals, spices, and herbs. These were together heated in a glass flask, and then a tiny little man would appear, and it would be intelligent. It would be animated matter given proper form and order by the male seed, which would then grow into that tiny little man. And they believed that, these medieval Christians believed that Jesus Christ was always a perfect being. He is the Alpha and the Omega from beginning to the end, and therefore he could not have developed as a fetus from a male seed nurtured by menstrual blood in the womb, but instead had to be placed into the womb as a perfect, intact, tiny little man, as a homunculus, which then was nourished in the womb by Mary's menstrual blood, until it grew to baby size, but in the form of a little man, and then she gave birth to it. And I'm going to show numerous medieval paintings which portray Jesus as a tiny little man sitting in the lap of the Virgin Mary in the famous Madonna and Child paintings painted in that era, in which Jesus was viewed as being akin to a homunculus. And there was a man, Alonso Tostado, in the 15th century, who basically described Jesus as a homunculus. First, let's take a look at a 1920 film by Paul Wegener, which is an adaptation of the story of Rabbi Lilith, who raised this golem to smite the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, who had threatened the Jews with a proclamation. And then the golem was used to leverage the emperor into issuing a pardon. Jesus Christ plays this same role. He is a monster raised from chaos who seduces the Gentiles. He's born of Satan, who is the accuser. The golem is conjured up in this film by Astaroth, who is the demon, the accuser. The accuser flips to become the advocate in Judaism, and the golem is a monster who is the advocate of the Jews, which is Jesus' role in the second coming, when he will tread the winepress and destroy the Gentile world. Here now is a segment from the 1920 film The Golem by Paul Wegener, who acted in it as the Golem. This is Rabbi Lilith opening up a book. This figure, named the Golem, was created in classical times by a Thessalonian sorcerer. If the life-awakening word is placed in the amulet on his chest, he will be alive as long as he wears it. This symbol is called the Shem. Shem means name in Hebrew. The rabbi grabs a pentagram, and he is to write the name, the Shem, onto the pentagram. Who can reveal the crucial word that will bring the golem to life? So the rabbi needs to know the word to write on that piece of paper to place in the pentagram, which he will then place on the clay figurine of the golem to animate it. Necromancy, the art of bringing dead beings to life. Astaroth is the guardian of a life-giving word that will awaken any and everything. Whether corpse or man's creation, whoever possesses the key of Salamanus and knows the great spell can compel Astaroth to reveal the word insofar as he awaits an auspicious constellation of the planets. Astaroth is Samael, Satan, the accuser, Ha-Satan. So again, the rabbi needs to know the word to write on that, place it in the pentagram, and place it on the chest of the golem to animate it. It's very similar to the concept of the tefillin. And I'm going to pause this. This is all derived from the mythology of the creation of Adam out of clay. Adam is given breath. The gods breathe life into Adam. Kabbalah explains that that takes the form of a spoken word, a magical word, which animates the clay of chaos and imparts order and life to it. And that word is going to be a met, and it's going to be revealed to the rabbi by Satan. The hour has come. The rabbi is playing the role of God. Rabbis believe that they are gods, and he is going to assume the power of the gods to instill life into inanimate chaos, into clay. So he is now conjuring up Astaroth, who is Samael or Satan. And he's doing so that Astaroth will reveal to him the magical word that he has to use to animate the clay. In the same way that Adam was given breath by a magical word. Notice that he's grabbing a pentagram. Pentagram relates to Jesus. As I'll explain later, it is the name Yeshua, which is the Kabbalistic name for Jesus, is composed of the 5 letters Yod He Shin Vav He, as opposed to the Tetragrammaton. This is the Pentagrammaton, composed of 5 letters for Jesus. Astaroth, appear, name the word. Again, he wants Satan to tell him the word that he needs to use to animate clay and make it living. There is Astaroth, Samael, Satan, Ha-Satan, the accuser, the adversary. But again, the adversary always flips and becomes the advocate of the Jews. He's said to have very foul breath. And this is symbolic of him breathing life into the clay through a spoken word. On behalf of the Lord, the spirits name the word. That's the word emet. Aleph, Mem, Tav in Hebrew. So now Satan has revealed to the rabbi the magical word that he has to write on that piece of paper, place into the pentagram, and then place the pentagram onto the golem's chest to animate it so that it can go out and destroy the emperor and the enemies of Israel, which is Jesus' role. First, he has to animate his friend. So what he has to do now is write down that magic word. The word, that terrible life-giving word, I have snatched it from the evil dark powers that be. I shall now call the golem to life. The word emet in Hebrew means truth. And John chapter 8 verse 32 says, the truth shall set you free. So this is cryptically revealing that the golem is Jesus Christ. Another aspect of that is emet starts with aleph, has the middle letter mem and the end letter tav. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, mem is the middle letter, and tav is the end letter. Jesus was referred to as the Alpha and the Omega. Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and Omega is the end letter. So he is identifying through the word emet, the golem, as Jesus Christ. This is very similar to the tefillin, which has a biblical verse inscribed on it and is placed on the forehead and arm of praying Jews. Notice the orientation of the pentagram. That's very significant. When it points downwards, it represents the evil aspect of Satan as the Leviathan. When it points upward, it represents the androgyne Adam. So that has brought the golem to life. The rabbi has now become a god who has animated chaos and provided it with order and intellect. The golem is his slave, and its role is to serve as his slave and to smite the non-Israelites, which is Jesus' role in the second coming. Another aspect of the story of the golem is that it can be killed by removing the letter aleph and leaving only mem and tav, which spells met, which is the Hebrew word for dead. So he is converted from truth to death by eliminating his beginning, by eliminating the first letter aleph, which corresponds to alpha. So all of that was depicted in the movie is essentially the legend of Rabbi Lerv. The Kabbalistic legends related to not only Rabbi Lerv, but other famous rabbis who conjured up the golem say that the word emet was inscribed on the forehead, or it was placed on an amulet which was hung from the neck of the golem. And that the means to kill the golem, to take life away from it, was to erase the letter aleph, the first letter in the word emet, truth, and convert it into the word met, meaning death. So I'm going to show you some slides and explain the religious significance of all this to the Kabbalists and how it portrays the golem as Jesus Christ in a very cryptic manner, which has not been understood by any Gentiles until I decoded it. Jesus Christ is the serpent. The cross is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Jesus hanging on the cross is the serpent in the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He provides gnosis to mankind in the same sense that the serpent gave gnosis to Eve and Adam. The succubus Lilith impregnated Eve with Cain in the same way that the succubus Lilith impregnated the Virgin Mary with Jesus Christ. And again, that is giving order to chaos through the creation of life. The Gnostics revealed this aspect of Christianity, that Cain was the son of the serpent, and that the god Lucifer impregnated Mary. So it's a repetition of the story of Cain, and Jesus is the reincarnation of Cain's soul. The name for Jesus in Christian Kabbalah is Yeshua, which is Yod-He Shin Vav-He. Yod-He Vav-He is the tetragrammaton. Jesus is the pentagrammaton. So he is the pentagram. So when the movie depicts the word emet being placed in a pentagram, it is cryptically identifying the golem as Jesus Christ. When the pentagram points upwards, it represents the animated clay of Adam and Eve to create humanity. When it points downward, it represents the Leviathan, Lemeth Vav Yod Tav Nun, which is the androgyne Samael Lilith. Adam is the androgyne Adam and Eve, and Satan is the androgyne Samael, the male aspect, and Lilith, the female aspect. It's important also to understand that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, son of Joseph, who is the serpent of darkness. The Messiah, son of David, is the serpent of light. There is the emanation of light, the straight light, which is represented by the letter Vav, which is also the number 6, representing the first 6 days of creation, the first 6 millennia. Then there is the letter Zion, and we're going to get into that in a bit. The golem was portrayed in the Talmud very early on. This was probably composed before the year 500 AD. It says, Rav says, if the righteous wish to do so, they can create a world, as it is stated, but your iniquities have separated between you and your God. In other words, there is no distinction between God and a righteous person who has no sins. And just as God created the world, so can the righteous. So a rabbi who's also a tzaddik and a prophet can create life because he is a God. And so he has the rights which were the province of God. So he can animate clay, is what the Sanhedrin is saying. Indeed, Rava created a man, a golem, using forces of sanctity. Rava sent his creation before Rabbi Zerah. Rabbi Zerah would speak to him, but he would not reply. Rabbi Zerah said to him, you were created by one of the members of the group, one of the sages. Return to your dust. So the golem is killed. The Gemara relates another fact, substantiating the statement that the righteous could create a world if they so desired. That's referring to the idea that man is a microcosm of the macrocosm of the world or the universe. And just as God created Adam as a microcosm of the universe, a rabbi is a god if he is a tzaddik, a righteous rabbi, and therefore he can also animate clay and create a microcosm of the universe in clay and create a living being. Rav Chanina and Rav Oshaya would sit every Shabbat Eve and engage in the study of Sefer Yetzirah. That's the first book of Kabbalah, which talks about how magical words can be used to create things. and which states that God created the universe through the use of words. And a third calf would be created for them, and they would eat it in honor of the Shabbat. Shabbat is very important. It's the seventh letter, the Zayin, which is the crowned Vav. So after the 6 days of creation, the Messiah, son of Joseph, is killed. His soul enters the Messiah, son of David. And then we enter the seventh millennium, which is the crown Vav of the letter Zayin. Vav is the number 6 in Hebrew, and Zayin is the number 7. From Chulin, folio 106a, it states, the Gemara relates there was a certain son of a demon that was in Rav Papa's house as a servant. It went to bring water from the river, and it delayed in returning. When it came, the member of Rav Papa's house said to it, why did you delay? It said to them, I waited until the foul waters passed. In the meantime, the demon saw the member of Rav Papa's house pouring water from the mouth of the pitcher before drinking from it. The demon said to them, if I had known that you regularly do this, I would not have delayed. I would have brought the water straight from the river, knowing you would pour out the foul waters. This is all cryptic imagery portraying the Golem as the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Talmudists believed that there had been a delay in the appearance of Messiah, son of David, and that delay was occasioned by the failure of the Jews to obey the Torah. And this is cryptically portraying that delay. So the name that Rabbi Lerv wrote on the piece of paper, which he placed in the pentagram to animate the golem, is the word emet, which is Hebrew for truth. And it is spelled Aleph Mem Tav. Aleph corresponds to the Greek alpha as the first letter of the alphabet, and Tav corresponds to the Greek omega as the end letter of the alphabet. This signifies through Mem, the middle letter, the flow from the beginning to the end, encompassing all of creation. And it identifies the Golem as Jesus Christ, who was repeatedly called the Alpha and the Omega in the book of Revelations. The means to kill the Golem was to erase the letter Aleph, and this is portrayed as pulling the pentagram off of the Golem in the movie. But in the traditional Jewish legends, the Aleph was erased from the forehead of the Golem to kill it, because that then spells the word met, mem tav, which means dead. Jesus has to be killed so that his soul, Yechida Mashiach, the soul of the Messiah, passes from the Messiah, son of Joseph, to the Messiah, son of David, who inherits that soul and then rules in the 7th millennium. The gematria of all this is very significant. Tav is the number 400 in Hebrew. Mem is 40. Aleph is 1. Together they add up to 441. If you add 4 plus 4 plus 1, it equals Tet, which is the number 9. Tet is the letter of the serpent, and it forms an Ouroboros out of the straight serpent of light Vav, the number 6, into the crowned serpent of the letter Zayin, which is the number 7, representing the 7th millennium. So the soul of Messiah, son of Joseph, the number 6, Vav, which is also a serpent, passes through at the end of the cycle in the Ouroboros to the Messiah, son of David, who will become the King of the Jews in the 7th millennium and rule. The letter Tet has both a good and evil nature. The goodness of it is the light, which is separated from the darkness, which is the evil of it, signifying the two serpents, serpent of light and the serpent of darkness. Jesus, the Golem, is the serpent of darkness. This dual aspect is also proven because in Hebrew, the first letter of both purity and impurity is tet, which is the number 9. In occultism and among the ancients, the number 9 was always feared as the most evil number, especially in the form of 81, which is 9 times 9. 9 is said to be the number of chaos because everything multiplied by 9 resolves back into 9. So it is destructive chaos which can take on no order. It always resolves back into the same thing. And this was demonstrated by the occultists mathematically because 9 times 1 is 9 and 9 equals 9. 9 times 2 is 18, and 1 plus 8 equals 9, etc. And the worst is 9 times 9 equals 81, and 8 plus 1 equals 9. So all the other numbers vanish in the solvent of the number 9, which is chaos. Again, the letter tet it represents both the evil serpent, Nachash, and it also represents the good serpent, the straight light. So Vav is the light emanating, the straight light, which is emanated, but then it returns because Jewry will perform Tikkun Olam, rectifying the world, and the light which was emanated from God will return to God in the form of epistrophe, to the crown, where it will be separated like the menorah, into the spectrum of light that creates white light through the 7 colors of the rainbow. The letter Zayin is the number 7, representing the 7th millennium, when the Messiah, son of David, will inherit the soul of Messiah, son of Joseph, who is Jesus Christ, represented by the serpent Vav 6. This forms an Ouroboros, where the tail is the Vav, and the head with the crown bearing the sword is Messiah, son of David, King of the Jews. And again, this letter Tet represents the dual aspect of Jesus Christ as both good and evil. And he becomes good when his soul is given to Messiah, son of David. Now we're going to move on to how the Christians interpreted the birth of Jesus in Mary's womb. This was very confusing to them because through Aristotle they had the belief that male seed is what formed human life, and the woman only provided the menstrual blood which nourished that male seed. There were opposing viewpoints that said that the woman also had a seed. They arrived at that because children often resemble their mothers more than their fathers. And that came very close to the understanding of the commingling of the spermatozoa with the egg cell. But the predominant view was the Aristotelian view that it was the male seed that created life, and that the womb became a vessel which nourished that seed. That gave birth to the alchemistic practice of trying to create homunculi, which were tiny little men created out of putrefied male seed, which was placed in a glass flask together with drugs, minerals, chemicals, spices, and herbs that were then heated in that glass flask, and supposedly a tiny little man would then appear. The Muslims forwarded this mythology. It began in Judaism and evolved from there into the medieval Christian alchemists and occultists. Now, Jesus was thought to be a homunculus by Alonso Tostado, because he believed that since Jesus was the Alpha and the Omega, he had always been perfect and could not have been an embryo which evolved into a baby, but instead had to be placed as a tiny little Jesus, a grown man, into the womb of Eve. Her womb then became the flask that was heated and provided the nourishment of the menstrual blood, which then enabled that tiny little man to grow into a baby-sized man that the Virgin Mary then gave birth to, and then nourished with food that then grew into a full-grown man. But he always took the form of a man even within the womb, and not the form of a fetus or a baby. This was kind of a predominant view among Christians in the Middle Ages, and there are numerous portraits of Jesus as a tiny little man sitting on Mary's lap in the famous Madonna and Child pose. And all of this relates to the conception of Jesus as a form of a homunculus. Quoting from William R. Newman's book, Promethean Ambitions, Alchemy and the Quest to Perfect Nature, pages 191 to 192 and 194, it states, Plato's Book of the Cow, that was a book that described how to use a cow to manufacture bees through spontaneous generation from the rotting corpse of a cow, that then became the creation of homunculi through rotting men's seed. This connection would be established further by the conservative 15th century theologian Alonso Tostado, whom we encountered in chapter 2 as a Thomistic opponent of alchemy. In addition to writing numerous commentaries on the various books of the Bible, Tostado composed a very interesting analysis of the paradoxes used by religious writers. One of these is an extended treatment of the concept of Mary as a sealed vessel, that's like the flask of the alchemists. In his exhaustive and digressive treatment of this trope, Tostado gives a thorough exposition on the generative method by which Mary conceived and gave birth to Jesus while remaining a virgin. Although no semen entered Mary's womb, Tostado argued that Jesus' humanity was ensured by the fact that the divine fetus was composed of the virgin's menstrual blood, as in the case of a normal human fetus. In ordinary human generation, however, the father's semen mixes with the menstrual blood and gradually forms an embryo within the womb. Here Tostado encounters a serious problem. Thanks to a conflict between Aristotelian theories of generation and Thomistic theology. As Thomas makes very clear in the Summa Theologia, the infant Jesus was formed intact from the beginning in an instant, without the fetal development of ordinary children. Why is this the case? Primarily because the Holy Spirit is an infinitely powerful agent and hence can fashion matter into its proper form in an instant. As Thomas puts it then, in the first instant of the assembled matters reaching the place of conception, the body of Christ was both perfectly formed and assumed. Tostado accepts Thomas's position, of course, but points out that this leads to further differences between the development in utero of Jesus and that of other babies. Since there was not enough menstrual blood in Mary's womb to condense in an instant into the cartilage, bones, and other hard parts of a full-size body, the infant had to be tiny at first, although completely developed. Indeed, even if the virgin's womb could have held a quantity appropriate to the forming of a baby of normal, fully developed size, the rush of blood from her other parts would have drained her body and caused immediate death. Jesus' growth within the womb of the Virgin was therefore solely one of augmentation, not of embryonic development. In a certain sense, then Jesus himself was conceived as a homunculus, a miniature human kept in a sealed vessel from the first instant of his creation. The idea of Jesus' instantaneous creation would find ample expression in the iconography of late medieval art, where the Holy Infant is often depicted as a fully formed child descending from above into the womb of Mary. Were merely containers for semen supplied by humans. It is actually the human female, like the Virgin Mary, who supplies the menstrual blood that makes her a genuine mother. So Christ was conceived of as a homunculus, essentially, by many medieval Christians. Here are some slides depicting the medieval art in which Jesus Christ was portrayed as a homunculus. Here we see this Madonna and child, and the baby Jesus is a full-grown man, and he's even suffering from male pattern baldness. This is how a homunculus was formed, from putrefied male seed mixed together with chemicals and herbs, heated up and allowed to grow into a tiny little man who had a life and had an intellect. He could think for himself and act for himself. And this again portrays men as being gods who can create life in the same way that Adam was created. This is a portrayal of a homunculus being manufactured as a hermaphrodite, in the same way that Adam was initially a hermaphrodite, an androgyne that was then separated into Adam and Eve. Another portrayal of the fire heating the homunculus in the flask. Very similar to the rabbi creating the golem. Here we see another image from the Garden of Eden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we see effectively Rabbi Lerv creating the golem as a homunculus. I'm going to go through these slides depicting Jesus as a fully grown man in the lap of Mary, to prove that this was a very prevalent belief among Christians in the Middle Ages. That one really shows it. Little Hercules Jesus. Mary nursing a swaddled, fully grown man, but it's a tiny man. It's a homunculus. That almost looks like a German expressionistic art. Again, the fully grown man in a small form. Part of this was the motivation of the Christians to not deny the humanity of Jesus and make him more of a God, a perfect being. And it's very important to understand how that virgin birth implies that Jesus was an abomination and was the product of men acting as if they were gods, and represents the evil side of chaos being given order by men instead of by God. So Jesus was depicted in three ways: as the product of the succubus Lilith, being placed into the Virgin Mary in the same sense that the succubus Lilith placed the child Cain into Eve. He is portrayed as the Golem, especially in his second coming, as chaos being given order, form, and intellect by the fully righteous rabbis to enter into the non-Israelite world as the avenging sword, as the smiting stone, as the stumbling stone, and as the winepress treading demon Shezmu, who will exterminate the nations and then give up his soul to Messiah, son of David, who will then reign in peace in the 7th millennium, as represented by the letter Zion, which is the number 7, which is the crowned Vav, the number 6, which represents Jesus. Together they form the letter Tet, which is the number 9, which is both an evil and a good number, which in occultism represents chaos, causing everything else to vanish into disorder. If you'd like to learn more about Kabbalah and Christianity, you can find my books at my website, CJBBooks.com. There's a link in the description below. There's also a link to my donation PayPal page. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe so that you catch more of my videos on these subjects. Please spread the word. I believe I'm the first to identify the Golem as the second coming of Jesus. And thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.